All right, the recording is started, and I say we go ahead and get started. It's 6:02, and I think people will probably continue trickling in. I'll keep an eye out for anybody that was struggling to find the Zoom link or anything like that. But hi everyone. It's nice to see you all here. I'm Sarah. I work for PHC as the outreach manager. And we're really excited to have Jym giving this talk on Seth Eastman. Jym came to us with this great idea about Eastman and his legacy as an artist. So we're really excited to learn more about that. And it goes really well with our theme this year, which is focused on American founding ideals, life and liberty, and the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So Jym's talk fits in really well with that. Um, Jym, are you all right if I go ahead and introduce you and get kicked off?
Sure. Yep.
All right. So, after earning degrees in philosophy and natural resources from the University of Maine, Jym St Pierre has worked for a number of state agencies and nonprofit conservation organizations in Maine over the past 50 years. He's an award-winning photographer, editor of the Maine Environmental News website, and has posted links to more than 100,000 articles. In Brunswick, Jym has served on a number of committees and boards. For PHC, he's led walking tours of the Brunswick Mall and the town commons. He's given presentations just like this about the history of the Brunswick town commons, local aviation, the Hunter Tavern, the Pejepscot proprietors, and mapping Brunswick across 5 centuries. Last fall, he received recognition from the Brunswick Rotary Club and the Maine legislature for decades of public service. Jym has also curated exhibits for PHC, including one about 3 centuries of the town commons, and most recently, his exhibit about the Androscoggin River in Brunswick and Topsham, which is up right now. And Jym's exhibit will be up through the end of April. So if you haven't had a chance to see it, please come and visit us this month. We are open Wednesday to Friday, and Jym's exhibit is on display. Take it away, Jym.
Okay. Um, does this sound okay? Can you hear me all right? And I'm going to follow my notes because there's a lot to share here. And do you want people to put questions in the chat? How do you want to do that?
Yes, people can absolutely put questions in the chat as we go, or it might be better for folks to hang on to it and we can have a concentrated Q&A at the end where they can either put it in the chat or they can turn on their audio and video.
Okay. So just a few comments to introduce. When I'm giving a talk, I'm always curious to look up what happened on this day in history. And so I looked up, and one of the most significant events that occurred on April 1 and April 2 was in 1987 when the Androscoggin River had a major flood. The water rose right up to the swinging bridge on the Androscoggin River 39 years ago. Um, but I want to back up and talk about what happened starting in the year 1808. In 1808, Brunswick, Maine was still a small developing town. The third meeting house was finished that year. The first class of students arrived at Bowdoin College. They were housed in a new dormitory, which the school funded from the sale of 2 of 5 townships it was granted from lands up north that had been taken from the indigenous tribes. The winter of 1807 and 1808 was unusually mild, with less snow than normal. On October 24th, 1808, Seth Eastman was born in Brunswick. His father, Robert Eastman, a silversmith, clockmaker, and inventor, had moved here from Concord, New Hampshire, with his young wife, Sarah Lee. She was from Portland. They had married 13 months earlier in December 1806. The next year, they moved to Brunswick to start a family. Seth was the oldest of at least a dozen children who would be born to Robert and Sarah Eastman. Young Seth Eastman didn't stay very long in Brunswick. The country was young and restless, and so was he. I put this map together to illustrate some of his travels. And as you can see, the map quickly got pretty complicated. And apparently, there were many other places that he also visited, but I think you get the picture. I would say for a 19th century kid from Brunswick, he got around much of the new United States. So his father, Robert Eastman, hoped that his oldest son would attend Bowdoin College here in Brunswick. But when he was 16, Seth left to enter the United States Military Academy at West Point, New York. He started there on July 1st, 1824, and graduated 5 years later in 1829. He began his Army career as a second lieutenant in the 1st Infantry Regiment and decided to make the U.S. Army his career. He eventually achieved the rank of Brigadier General. In 1830, the year after he graduated from West Point, Second Lieutenant Seth Eastman was assigned to Fort Crawford and then Fort Snelling, which was situated on a high cliff in the Minnesota Territory near what later became Minneapolis. A large frontier installation with 20 officers and up to 300 enlisted men, the fort was deep in American Indian Territory. It was on the upper Mississippi River, and while stationed there for 3 years, Eastman learned the Sioux language and he sketched and painted prolifically, capturing many scenes of American Indian life. During his first posting at Fort Snelling, Seth Eastman did something else. He married a 15-year-old Dakota girl named Stans Sacred. She was the daughter of Cloud Man, a Dakota chief of French and Indian ancestry, and his Dakota wife. In 1832, shortly after the birth of their daughter, Winona, Eastman was reassigned from Fort Snelling to Louisiana and then back to West Point. He abruptly declared his marriage ended, as was typical of many European American men at the time, who often abandoned Native American women and their children. During his time as an instructor at West Point in New York from 1833 to 1840, Seth Eastman became a cartography expert. He published this textbook to make the technique of map making and map reading more understandable. He created symbols that could be used on maps to show height, width, and depth on a two-dimensional sheet of paper. His textbook was made mandatory for all topography classes at West Point Military Academy. For his work, he was elected an honorary member of the National Academy of Design in 1838. Eastman also did a couple of other things while he was back at West Point. First, he learned to paint under the tutelage of Robert Weir, who was an accomplished artist of the Hudson River school style. And second, in 1835, Seth Eastman wed again. This time he married strong-willed 17-year-old Mary Henderson. She was the daughter of a surgeon from Virginia who worked at the military school. You can see they had a slew of kids while he was in at West Point in New York. In 1840, Captain Seth Eastman was assigned by the Army to Florida, where the Second Seminole War was raging, which was one of the fiercest conflicts waged by the U.S. government against American Indians. While he was stationed in Florida, Eastman completed a number of paintings there. It may not be great art, but he was learning. I looked it up and found that this watercolor sold a decade ago for more than $21,000. In addition to experience, Eastman also contracted an illness in the wet Florida environment. After being reunited with his wife in Virginia and recovering, in the fall of 1841, Seth was sent back to Fort Snelling. This time, he was commanding officer. Mary and their three kids joined him. During the 7 years they were stationed in Minnesota, the couple's family grew. Their son Frank was born in 1844, daughter Virginia in 1847, and son John in 1849. There's no record that I could find of whether Seth reconnected with his Indian wife or daughter. But Seth and Mary became very interested in Dakota culture. Mary collected traditional stories and legends, while Seth studied Native American life. He began experimenting with oil painting and recorded many scenes of daily life. In 1853, Seth and Mary published an American Aboriginal portfolio, which you can see here. They sensed that European American conquest of the continent would, and I believe they thought should, continue, but they also sensed that something important was being lost. So here's another Brunswick connection. After Henry Wadsworth Longfellow graduated from Bowdoin College in 1825, his reputation grew. He became the most celebrated 19th century American poet. Seth and Mary Eastman's Aboriginal portfolio came out in 1853. 2 years later, heavily influenced by the Eastman's work, Longfellow published his poem, The Song of Hiawatha. I'm sure many people remember hearing it in school. It starts out, by the shores of Gitche Gumee, by the shining Big Sea water, stood the wigwam of Nokomis, daughter of the moon. I'm not going to read the whole thing. You can read it on your own. It's long. I think it takes several weeks, maybe a few months to get through the whole thing. Um, and I found online that there are quite a few fun parodies, which you can look up on your own. All right, well, sorry for the diversion. Back to the main event. In 1848, when he was 40 years old, Seth Eastman heard that Congress had authorized a study of Indians by a former U.S. Indian agent named Henry Roll Schoolcraft. Schoolcraft was an explorer, ethnologist, geologist, and geographer. Eastman asked to be assigned as illustrator for the project. In October 1848, he traveled down the Mississippi River and spent time in Texas sketching. And then in 1849, Captain Eastman settled his family in Washington, D.C. He began work there on what would become hundreds of pictures to illustrate the massive Schoolcraft study, which was published in 6 volumes from 1851 to 1857. It was a monumental work that consumed Eastman for 5 years. During that time, he completed 275 pages of illustrations to accompany Schoolcraft's 6 volume series on the Indian tribes of the United States. And by the way, um, you can buy this rare book series for a mere $20,416.06 plus $19.81 for shipping if you go online immediately after this presentation. For Schoolcraft's compendium, Seth Eastman created 85 compositional drawings of native life and more than 180 drawings of artifacts and maps. As one source I found said, quote, Seth Eastman's precise and exquisitely executed illustrations of Indian life, painted from his frontier sketches, prove that he was singularly qualified to undertake this epic work, unquote. So here are several more examples, I think, that give you a good idea of Seth Eastman's artistic skills. His sketches and paintings provide some of the most important documentation we have of Native American life on the plains. Many of his watercolors were turned into lithographs or engravings. So let me flip through these. Here's an example of a painting that was turned into an engraving. During the Civil War, Eastman was back in Maine as a mustering and dispersing officer. By December 1863, the war had shifted in favor of the Union. Seth Eastman retired from active service with disability, but the Army wasn't ready to let him go yet. For much of 1864, he was put in command of Elmira Military Prison in New York. It earned the nickname Hellmira as one of the most brutal Civil War prisons due to poor sanitation and insufficient supplies. And then, as a brigadier general, he commanded Fort Mifflin in Pennsylvania for a year until November 1865. And then for another year until December 1866, he was a member of the board for the examination of candidates for promotion in the Army. And from December 1866 to September 1867, he was in command of Harrodsburg Military Asylum in Kentucky. So after finally escaping his prison and asylum assignments, Eastman was able to focus once again on painting. For 2 years, from 1867 to 1869, he painted 9 scenes of American Indian life for the U.S. House Committee on Indian Affairs. And then in 1870, he was commissioned by Congress to create a series of 17 paintings of important U.S. forts. He completed this painting of Fort Knox on the Penobscot River in Maine, as well as others of Fort Gorges and Fort Scammell in Maine, plus forts in 10 other states and territories. Today, after being hidden away for a time, Eastman's paintings of the 17 forts once again hang in the U.S. Capitol. 8 are on the Senate side and 9 are on the House side. And last year, during the 150th anniversary of the completion of the paintings, they received renewed attention. On August 31st, 1875, Seth Eastman was finishing another painting of West Point in his Washington, D.C. studio when he died suddenly of a stroke. But wait, that's not the end of the story. Remember that in 1830, when he was stationed at Fort Snelling, Seth Eastman married a 15-year-old Native American girl named Stan Sacred, and they had a daughter named Winona. Well, Winona, who was also known as Mary Nancy Eastman, married a Sioux man. She had 5 children with him, but during the birth of the youngest, she died. That baby was first called by his native names, but later he went by Charles Alexander Eastman. In 1862, 4-year-old Charles Eastman was taken to Canada for a time with his grandmother and uncle after his father was sentenced to death for his part in the American Indian Wars. Charles grew up to become a noted doctor, writer, ethnohistorian, and social reformer. He was among the first Native Americans to be certified in Western medicine. After working as a physician on reservations in South Dakota, he became increasingly active as a voice for Native American rights. In 1890, he was the only doctor to treat victims of the massacre of the Bigfoot Band at Wounded Knee. So Charles Eastman, Seth's grandson, also worked to improve the lives of youth. He helped to found the Boy Scouts of America. He started 32 Native American chapters of the YMCA, and he inspired the well-known author Ernest Thompson Seton to form the Woodcraft Indians, which became another wildly popular group for boys. Ernest Seton, in turn, inspired several other groups, including the Order of Woodcraft Chivalry, among others. Ernest Seton's bird illustrations inspired another fellow with a Maine connection, Roger Torrey Peterson, who taught at the Audubon School on the Maine coast and who developed a popular series of field guides. Seton's books also inspired Rudyard Kipling to write the Jungle Books. So I think this is really interesting that the abandoned son of a kid from Brunswick inspired a famous author who inspired a famous bird artist and a famous novelist and poet who themselves have inspired millions of birders and entertained millions of readers. I guess things come around. But there's another twist to this story. Remember Mary Eastman, Seth's second wife? At first, Mary was an activist who used her books to rail against the military and missionaries for their attitude toward Native Americans. However, her focus shifted when the story came full circle to Brunswick once again. Remember that Mary Henderson Eastman was from the South. In 1851, Harriet Beecher Stowe um, published a series of anti-slavery articles. The next year, they were issued as the book Uncle Tom's Cabin. Immediately, Mary Eastman wrote Aunt Phyllis's Cabin, which chronicled, which defended Southern slaveholding society. The novel was one of the most widely read anti-Uncle Tom novels. It was a huge commercial success, selling tens of thousands of copies. But wait, before condemning Mary Eastman, there's another twist. After the Eastmans left Fort Snelling, they lived in Washington, D.C. At first, Mary did defend Southern slaveholding society. However, influenced by the fact that her husband and their sons fought for the North, she changed her position on slavery and became a Unionist. In 1864, 2 years after her anti-Uncle Tom book, Mary Eastman published a very different book in praise of a Union heroine. Jenny Wade was a 20-year-old young woman. She was the only direct casualty of the Battle of Gettysburg. She was killed by a stray bullet on July 3rd, 1863, while innocently kneading bread in her sister's kitchen. The book about Jenny Wade showed Mary Eastman's allegiance had shifted to the Union and against slavery. So Seth Eastman died in 1875 at the age of 67. Mary Henderson Eastman died on her birthday in 1887 at the age of 69. They're both buried at Oak Hill Cemetery in Washington, D.C. So it's fair to ask, what's the significance of Seth Eastman as an artist? I would say his works have historic importance. While photography was still in its infancy, he documented disappearing cultures and gave us a record of military architecture at a key period in American history. I think his work also has artistic merit. He took a restrained pictorial approach to depicting indigenous people and military forts. He showed American Indians without romanticizing them. On the other hand, he did tend to romanticize the forts he depicted. For instance, his representation of Fort Delaware revealed nothing of the site's history as an infamous prisoner of war camp for captured Confederate soldiers. Instead, it depicts the fort nestled into a serene landscape, softly illuminated by the morning light. Overall, I'd say Seth Eastman tried to follow the advice of Asher Durand, another Hudson River School artist, who urged painters to, quote, draw natural forms with scrupulous fidelity. Seth, Seth Eastman, of course, was a man of his era. It was an era of national expansionism. One source I found says, quote, Eastman's work illustrates how images of the landscape supported and extended the United States work of empire building. Eastman's images recorded the empire's reach into the Northwest and helped spur it on, unquote. And some of his pictures were controversial. One depicted a Native American warrior holding up the scalp of a white person. It was removed twice from display in the U.S. Capitol building because of negative comments from viewers. In the 1930s, the painting was displayed again, and I don't know, it may be removed by the current administration now again, which is trying to sanitize our history. So I'd say that Seth Eastman may be one of Brunswick's most accomplished, if little known, native sons. He's prominently celebrated in Minnesota and in the Dakotas as an outstanding soldier artist. I think he deserves to be better known here in Maine. And thank you for wait, there's one more twist to this tale. While researching Seth Eastman's story and my own roots, I stumbled upon a curious coincidence. I discovered that I'm related to him. We have a common ancestor. Thomas Falbrigg was from the 16th century. Thomas was Seth's seventh great grandfather, and Thomas was my 11th great grandfather. So, what are the chances of finding a common ancestor from 500 years ago to a guy who left Brunswick 2 centuries ago while I arrived here just 15 years ago? I suppose if you look hard enough, we're all related. I just wish I had some artistic talent like Seth Eastman. So my last couple slides just to give you an idea of some of the sources that I used putting together the presentation. There's plenty of information, lots of interesting books and articles if you wanted to read more. And this is my last slide. So it looks like it's about 6:30 and happy to try to answer any questions. Sarah, are you going to handle?
If there's anything that pops up in the chat, I will be happy to read it for everyone.
Okay.
John says, thank you for an interesting story in history. Oh, Janice would like to know about the time Eastman was in Brunswick, about the amount of time that Eastman spent in Brunswick.
Well, he was born in 1808 and he left at age 16 to go to West Point. So, as far as I could find, that's the extent of time that he actually spent in Brunswick. As I mentioned, he was in Maine during his time when he was assigned here by the Army during the Civil War. I don't know if he came back to Brunswick at that time. He obviously traveled around a lot, especially for somebody in the 19th century. But I think primarily his time in Brunswick was the early part of the 19th century.
Okay. And Peggy has asked, do you know why he might have chosen West Point over Bowdoin?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I have no idea. I have a feeling he was just restless and probably more interested in action than in academia. Um, and you have to remember that West Point was a more established school at that point. Bowdoin was really just getting going. Bowdoin was a pretty small school at that time in Brunswick, and like lots of kids that age, maybe he just wanted to get out of the house. I think he really wanted an adventurous life.
All right. Diana has asked about relatives associated with Eastman. Kodak? Question mark.
Oh, Eastman Kodak. I didn't find any references that there's a connection there. I don't think Eastman is a particularly unusual name, but if there's a connection there, I don't know. I didn't find anything about that.
All good. Kim Cook would like to know if the Eastman family stayed in Brunswick while Seth traveled.
Um, yes, I don't have all the statistics in front of me, but I did read that his father became part owner of a mill on the Androscoggin River here, and he actually invented a type of saw that he patented. So he was accomplished, including as an inventor. And I don't know the year that the family might have left here. I think at some point they might have gone back to his father's hometown in New Hampshire, but I'd have to research that.
Okay. Peggy would like you to put the references slide back up, or maybe the first one, so she can grab some notes off that. Um, Karen would like to know if Seth's Brunswick home or his family's Brunswick home is still standing.
Well, I wish I knew the answer. I looked and looked, and I tried to figure out, where exactly in town because Brunswick at that point was not that big. Um, but maybe that information is available somewhere. I could not find it. Um, if it's an existing structure, it would be an interesting historic site to, recognize. Um, I suspect that because of all the changes that have happened over the centuries, that whatever building, whatever house they lived in, or it may even have been just an apartment, it may no longer be here.
That makes a lot of sense. Janice says that she's never heard of Aunt Phyllis's cabin prior to this presentation, and is really interested by it. Is it better known in other regions, or has it generally fallen into obscurity?
Well, I think, as I said at the time, it obviously got a lot of attention because it was the counterpoint to Uncle Tom's Cabin. Um, it clearly was a bestseller at that time, but that was a different era during the Civil War. And uh, I'm sure that you can find copies probably through interlibrary loan, if not locally. Um, you know, to tell you the truth, Uncle Tom's Cabin is not high literature, and I don't think Aunt Phyllis's Cabin is probably either, but they were very important, obviously, uh, culturally at the time. And we talk a lot about Harriet Beecher Stowe and Uncle Tom's Cabin because we know so much about her connection to Brunswick.
Well, and certainly given the way that the war went, sort of sometimes the idea that the victors write history is not always a bad thing. It means that some of the countertext to Uncle Tom's Cabin probably didn't become as famous, which makes good sense.
And it was not the only counterpoint to Uncle Tom's Cabin uh, book that was available, that was written, published, and available at the time. I just thought it was really interesting to discover that we had that Brunswick connection.
Roxanne has asked if we know if the Bowdoin College Art Museum is making any effort to purchase an Eastman painting or has shown any interest in your research.
Well, that's very interesting. I would like to know the answer to that. Um, maybe the Bowdoin Art Museum would do an exhibit sometime of Seth Eastman's work if they can borrow a number of paintings, as they do frequently for their traveling exhibits. Um, Maybe I'll talk to Bowdoin College and see if they have any interest in that.
That would be great. I think you've got some support amongst our audience for that. Has anybody else got any questions? All right. Well, for those who are typing away furiously, continue. If you have another question, still feel free to put it in the chat. Um, you're getting a lot of compliments in there, Jim, so definitely check it. Um, for everyone else, I just want to say thank you very much for attending. The recording of this presentation will go up on our YouTube, and there's a lot of our other presentations are available there. So if you're interested, give it a scroll through. And thank you to Jim for all his research. I can tell how much effort has gone into this. This is really fascinating.
Well, thank you everybody for joining tonight.